$285,000 per year to meet those new requirements. Construction, this is going in and retrofitting, for the most part, existing systems or existing drainages where we know we have water quality or flooding or erosion or habitat issues. So it's the planning, design, and construction. It's the nuts and bolts and moving dirt. This also is not an NPDES permit requirement, but it's the on the ground, get it done kind of stuff. We took a look at not only the dots, but known problems that have been on the books forever, habitat, fish passage locations, a variety of things, and put together, well, how many total projects might there be? What might that cost be totally? Came up with a very large number, divided it by 20 years, and that's how we came up with this $1.3, $1.4 million per year. Now, if we spread those projects out over 40 years, of course the number would go down. And that, again, is part of the discussion. What is a reasonable capital program to undertake? And then finally, program management and external coordination. Well, this is just making sure we're all moving in the same direction, providing accountability to you as taxpayers. So if you want to know what's going on, then we need to be able to provide a good response on how things are being managed and where the money's going and how the services are being provided. It also includes coordination with many external groups, whether it's watershed groups, our local Hood Canal Coordinating Council, South Sound Alliance. There are a variety of groups that we have ongoing external coordination with. This is an NPDES permit requirement, and this we are estimating could cost up to $560,000 per year. And that's a big chunk of change. So altogether, if you add all of these goodies up, you come up to roughly $4.1 million per year. Now in the brochure, the bifold, it adds up, I think, to $3.8 million. And I want to take just a quick minute to highlight one of the differences there. If you subtract this $300,000 from the 4.1, you'll come up with the 3.8. And the difference is that the consultant originally considered that the development regulations, if we were to implement that particular program element, that it would be paid for by development fees. So in other words, new building permit fees. And it was just counted as a zero, but it is a cost to whoever's taking out that new fee or new permit. And so that's why you see that here. And this is just a pie chart breaking out the various elements by percent. And again, this could change. Here you see construction is about 1/3 of the total program. Maybe that's not a priority to you, or you feel that something else is a priority. And that's, again, part of the discussion. Is it important to bump up education and outreach? Maybe that is an important component. So with that, I'm going to turn to funding and talk about the funding portion. So currently, as I said earlier, the majority of our activities are grant funded. We have some of our activities funded with developer fees. So again, when you come in for a building permit, a small part of that goes to pay for, say, for example, the stormwater review portion. A big piece of our work the maintenance that we talked about on our county road rights-of-way is paid for by the road fund, and that will continue. We also use, to some extent, the real estate excise tax. A small portion of that is used to go towards construction of projects. And that's what those funds are limited to construction activities. And then we also use the rural county sales and use tax, which is referred to as the .09 monies. And that is used to fund, right now, work and effort in Oakland Bay. So the consultant identified 9 potential new revenue sources that could be used. And these sources are generally in the category of a tax or a fee. 2 great things, right? And we will be looking at reducing those 9 sources to 1 to 3 revenue sources to take a closer look at. So what are those 9 sources that the consultant identified? The first that you see is an impervious surface charge. Maybe you've heard of some jurisdictions that have a stormwater utility. Those jurisdictions charge a stormwater utility fee, and that's what this is referring to. And it's based on impervious surface. So if you were a commercial property and had every square inch of the property paved, then you would pay a higher rate than somebody, say, for example, that had 40 acres in their house, because you would have less impervious on your property. Property tax, well, we're all familiar with property tax and what that is. A business license fee, this is a little different. In Renton, I believe, a business license fee was used to collect revenues and make transportation improvements. And here the consultant thought that this is possible to apply, in that it's looking at what impacts or benefits businesses may have for clean water. A vehicle license fee is another possible fee that could be considered, thinking about the links between transportation and impacts to our water. Sales tax, again, you're familiar with that. Real estate excise tax, a charge per parcel or a charge per acre. This refers to the charge or fee that the conservation districts are authorized to collect. And then finally, debt, which is issuing bonds. And typically, debt is used for capital construction projects, those big ticket items that you cannot pay as you go, or it's difficult to pay as you go. And these funding sources, some of these are very unlikely for a variety of reasons. Some of these sources will generate very little revenue. So it's more costly perhaps to collect than the amount of revenue that you're actually bringing in. It would require approval from another entity. So for example, the charge per acre and charge per parcel, that would require approval from the Mason Conservation District Board of Supervisors. And they're not very likely to say, oh sure, take this money. It would also, some of the funds could significantly reduce funds that are available for basic county services. And again, that's not very likely that we would take money from our sheriff, for example, and say, well, sorry, a chunk of that needs to go over for water quality or stormwater improvements. There may be times when those are appropriate, but not likely. Several of these sources also have limitations. So, for example, the impervious surface charge must be collected and kept in a separate fund. In a way, that's a good limitation because it makes sure that the money that comes in is spent for the purpose that it was collected. A vehicle license fee cannot exceed $20 per vehicle unless approved by the voters. And real estate excise tax must be used for planning, design, and construction of capital facilities. So even though we may use REIT, it would not pay, for example, a public education and outreach program. It would not pay for some of the other activities. It would be focused on construction. So I apologize that this is so light on the bar chart, but this is just to give you a general idea about the ability to generate revenue. You can see that, for example, the charge per acre at the very end would only generate a very, very little amount of revenue. Or at the other end of the spectrum, the impervious surface charge or property tax sources could generate quite a bit of revenue. So we're almost to the end, yay. What I'd like to leave you with is, well, why are we considering this now? I'll bring it around circle. Commissioner Sheldon says, as we open, that these are very challenging times economically. So why on earth are we talking about this now? Well, we know that as our grants go away, our services will diminish as well. And so we want to start the conversation. What services are important to continue? If we have an established dedicated funding source, it increases our ability to leverage other funding sources so we can expand the potential to provide services. We also know from other jurisdictions that if we wait and delay and we have impacts or problems, that it can be up to 8 times more costly to solve problems after the fact. And so it's kind of like your car. If you delay maintenance on the car, you could have changed this or that and spent a little, but if you didn't change your oil and now you've got a new engine to replace, it's more costly. So somewhat similar here. And probably maybe the most important thing in my mind is that we have an opportunity to select our priorities here in Mason County, and we have an opportunity to be able to implement on our schedule. And if we wait and have the conversation after we're handed a permit, then we have strict timelines that we have to comply with the permit, and we also have very specific permit requirements. So this is our opportunity to look ahead and think about how can we start taking steps at our priority in our schedule. So again, just next steps, we will have this meeting. We'll have a meeting tomorrow up in Belfair to share information and hear comments from folks in the Belfair area. We'll go off and take your comments into consideration, refine and rework program, and then we will come back in November again with a meeting similar to this and share with you what we have at that time. And then in January, around that time, our Stormwater Task Force will be developing their final recommendations and making those to the Board of County Commissioners. And if the board wishes to take action, then they would set a public hearing, and that would be sometime in April. All right, so now comes the good part.
Loretta,
Yes.
I'd like to ask you a question.
Yes.
So on this bifold here, you've got different programs that you went through.
Correct.
On the top, it says these are typical components that can be found in many jurisdictions.
Yes.
Not necessarily Mason County. And then down at the very
Correct.
fine print at the bottom, you make some description of the NPDES permit.
Yes.
Okay, our population, we're one of the most rural counties in the state.
Right.
There's only 6 counties in the state, there are 39 that have 1 incorporated city.
Right.
You have to have 1, you need 1 county seat. Okay. our population is about 60 people per square mile.
Yes.
This says 1,000 people per square mile are required to comply.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a long way to go to get to that.
You know,
And you talk about in the fine print of a residential population, urbanized residential population of 50,000 people.
mm-hmm.
Shelton is about 8,900 or 9,000.
Right.
How can this NPDES permit be applicable in such a rural county?
The most recent round of NPDES, well, right now they are rewriting the permit. And so at this time, they being Department of Ecology.
They, okay.
Excuse me, I'll be clear about that.
Mason County Department of Ecology?
No, Washington State Department of Ecology. I don't think we have a Mason County Department of Ecology. Anyway, Washington State Department of Ecology is in the process of rewriting the permit. And as part of that process, they need to notify the next group of communities that will come under permit. And for example, the next community that would be somewhat similar perhaps, or next county is Lewis County. And they're looking at Centralia as the city, and then the UGA around that jurisdiction. So Lewis County will be brought into the permit requirements. And how they looked at that, Commissioner Sheldon, is the city had to have a population of 10,000. So of course Shelton did not meet that under our most recent census. But that would be the first trigger. So when the city of Shelton reached a population of 10,000, then it's conceivable the Department of Ecology would begin to look at the Shelton UGA, not the entire county, but the UGA around the city of Shelton.
It sounds like we're just, under those criteria, we are a very long way before we go under these requirements. Lewis County has 9 incorporated cities.
Mm-hmm.
Chehalis, Centralia,
Right.
They have some very large populations.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We don't. Grace Harbor County has 9 incorporated cities. When you look at Westport and Aberdeen, Oakland, Cosmopolis, Montesano, Elma, we are very, very rural. Why would the Department of Ecology bring in these very rural counties into a program when they don't have enough money or staff to run a program for the urban counties? I just don't understand how we could be caught in the
We should
in
at
this
some
net.
point have an ecology representative that is very conversant with NPDES permit requirements, because they would certainly be able to address how soon that may come down the road.
I can't think of a single argument that would support what we're doing, what's being considered in view of how minuscule we are in the larger scale.
Is there any of the activities, given the components that we were talking about, are there any of those activities that you find are important to carry out? Is it important to conduct water quality monitoring? Is it important to have education and outreach?
Is this to say we're doing nothing today?
What it is to say is that, no, we are doing many things today, but they are grant funded. And when those grants go away, those services go away. And so that's really the question. When those services end, what is it that is important to you to continue? And if it's important, again, how do we pay for that?
Question.
Yes.
Loretta, are you
Okay.
are you a state employee
No, I am a county
for
employee.
Mason? Okay.
Yes.
Here's my question,
Yes.
and I've been listening very carefully.
Mhm.
Let me preface it with observation on who could be opposed to clean air and clean water
Sure.
and school children, and I remember the
Sure.
the lotto and how that was all gonna go for the kiddies, and then it went into the general fund. This county can't maintain its infrastructure now. I'm up the valley, there's 2 bridges in a state of collapse. If they go, we got no emergency services. Why would we want to give more money to the county? And people are willing sometimes to vote and tax themselves further if you can demonstrate they're getting something for the money. And I watched all these ideas, where to get this money from, but I didn't see anything like the Tim Eyman initiative that passed about auditing each state agency to make sure they're doing something for the money they're getting. So when can we as taxpayers see that you guys would be bringing home the bacon? Where would the litmus test, where's the beef? Where would you show that we're getting something, some bang for our buck, instead of, just all these regulations, but, I don't see any difference. Like I said, right now, the county isn't even maintaining the infrastructure it's got.
So accountability is highly
Yeah,
important.
you guys are asking for money, you got all kinds of creative ideas, it all adds up, more money out of our pocket, no matter how you look at it. But I don't see, the new car.
Okay. Do we want to take a 5 or 10 minute break and get some snackies? Are we all good? Keep rolling on the questions? All right. Steve, you had a question.
Comment to tag on to his.
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
it's important that this is a county program. The city has a parallel program.
Yes.
And that actually takes the city NPDES permit or that need away from the county. And so that's an entirely separated issue. It doesn't matter if we have an incorporated city or not. We're at the 60 people per acre for the county. Yeah, per square mile.
But they're the triggers, Steve, if you will.
Yeah, but there's a separation here. There's already a plan, or the city will have a plan that's parallel to the county's plan. The other thing is that I sit on this board, so I'm kind of familiar with what's going on. I'm probably kind of hard-headed. But the 9 suggested sources, there was not one that everybody jumped up and down and said, this is a really good idea. There was 9 proposals that not any group could agree on, really. There was some that everybody said, no, this isn't going to work. But there wasn't one that everybody thought was a good idea. That's really important. And there wasn't a 10th option there. None of the above. That wasn't one of the choices either. The other thing is, what is the county's responsibility in stormwater? The county itself already charges for building permits, septic tanks. Those are by de facto permits and fees associated with you keeping your stormwater or your discharges on your property and control. And that's how it's handled today.
Correct.
And to say that we need to put a fee back on top of that, well, we've already got those fees in place. And that doesn't really, septic tanks are designed and engineered so they don't fail in storm conditions or flood conditions. Now, if they do, then we've got a problem with the way we build our septic tanks and what we're replacing. So I've got a myriad of problems here with this, and the way I look at it, the county's responsibility is what they generate, not the people of the county, but the county itself. And that would be impervious surfaces on road or buildings, places where they actually are generating stormwater problems. Now, ditches, culverts, bridges. Now, if the culvert is restrictive to flow of water, it should be increased so that the storm water doesn't flow over the road or cause a problem on someone's property. But if it's being prepared for fish passage, that's a different problem. That needs to be addressed in a different manner with a different funding source. If it's the ditches are cleaned out nearly every year, I think every one of you have probably seen somebody cleaning a ditch. But what that does is take the vegetation out of the ditch. and allows that stormwater then to go directly into the groundwater. That's a major problem. If the vegetation is left in the ditch, you have a natural recycling of the water and the pollutants in the water. It's very important to keep biologic function. And we now, with our process, and we're spending about $1 million a year doing that, that is probably the worst thing we could be doing in this county, preparing for that 500-year flood. It's costing us money and it's ruining biologic function. Anyway, I could go on all night, but that's for you to think about.
Steve, how would you, what about the, for example,
And I make my, for those that don't know me, I make my living on the water. I'm by necessity have to have clean water. But I also like fiscal responsibility in my county too.
in terms of monitoring, is that important?
Didn't you say we are monitoring?
Yeah, we are monitoring, but it's not a stable monitoring base
Right.
that we have. It's always been done by grants through state, county health departments, and tribal. The tribal does some monitoring too. Monitoring is important, but I think that the funding sources could be stabilized in a different manner and a different level. Maybe our senator could have more impact in that in Olympia than we could at the local level.
Excuse me for a minute, I'm going to start capturing on paper so that when we leave, we've got all your good comments and thoughts.
You know, the state is responsible for some of this pollution by the permits that it issues to corporations. Maybe they need to belly up to the bar and pay for some of the damage.
That was one of the 9 options.
Yeah.
Well, really, I'll make a comment. Many people,
Yes.
you mentioned one of the funding sources is sales tax. Well, there is no new sales tax that we can enact that would
Correct.
pay for this, but
Right.
each rural county receives a credit on state sales taxes because of their density, because they're low-density population counties.
Now, are you referring to the .09?
What we call the .09 money. So
Mhm.
.09, 9 would be 9/100ths of each penny
Mhm.
stays in the county for infrastructure projects, which could be sewer or a bridge or those kinds of projects. So we get about $600,000, this county, every year for those projects. But we've been spending $200,000, a third of it, every year in Oakland Bay on monitoring and education programs. And some people say, haven't we educated people enough about don't pour their oil down the drain, clean up their septic tank, make sure their drain field is functioning, all those things, and take that money and actually do a project with it.
Okay.
Something that is a stormwater retention pond, or improvements to a sewer system, or some of drainage issues.
You're suggesting to consider the overall budget and maybe we're not spending well in some other areas,
Right.
those money can be shipped over here.
And use some existing money for actual on-the-ground bricks and mortar type projects, instead of continuing to do this education program where we've got agency after agency after agency doing education in our state on water quality. The Puget Sound Partnership being the most visible. WSU, Sea Grant program, we go on and on with different agencies that all have education as a component of their mission.
How about the fire halls having a waste oil and motor oil disposal? I understand non-point pollution on the U.S. For oil getting dumped on the ground is 7 times the total spillage from the Exxon Valdez every year. Now,
I'm sorry, one more time?
Oil,
Yes.
it's bad for us when
Yeah.
it gets in the aquifer.
Yes.
7 times as much oil is dumped on the land in the continental U.S. every year as the Exxon Valdez spilled up in Alaska. A lot of people, when I was a kid, I was stupid enough, I didn't live here, I lived in the city. I used to drain my oil right in the gutter. You know, I didn't have a garage, and there's a lot of people today that are